In this video, we will be looking at all the questions from the May-June 2023 Foundation Paper 2, which is a calculator paper, and we will also be looking at how the marks are allocated for each question. Question 1. Write 6,184 correct to the nearest 100. So the hundreds number is the 1, and if we look at the number next to it, it is 8, which is greater than 5. Therefore, we will round this up to 6,200, and this is worth 1 mark. Question 2. Write 0.7 as a fraction. 7 is in the 10th place, and therefore to write this as a fraction, we will write it as 7/10 or 7 over 10, and this was also a 1 mark question. Question 3. Change 9 meters into centimeters. In order to change meters into centimeters, we have to multiply by 100, and therefore if we do 9 times 100, that gives us 900 centimeters, and that is worth 1 mark. Question 4. Simplify 3 times 4t. So if we do 3 multiplied by 4, that gives us 12. So the answer for this is 12t, and this is a 1 mark question too. Question 5. Here's a list of numbers: 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. One of these numbers is a multiple of 25. Which number? A multiple means it is a number in the times table of 25. So if we look at the times table of 25, we have 25, 50, 75, and 100. Therefore, the number that appears in the 25 times table is 100, and that is the multiple of 25. So our answer for this question is 100, and this is also worth 1 mark. Question 6. Shari has a fair ordinary dice. She rolls the dice once. Part A. On the probability scale, mark with a cross the probability that Shari gets the number 7. So because Shari is rolling an ordinary dice and it is a fair dice, we know that a fair ordinary dice only has numbers from 1 up to 6. Therefore, it is impossible for her to get 7, and therefore we will mark 0 with a cross, and that will be worth 1 mark. Part B. On the probability scale, mark with a cross the probability that Shari gets an even number. So on the dice, we have a chance of getting either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, and the even numbers are 2, 4, and 6, and there are 3 out of the total numbers, 3 out of 6, which is a half, and therefore we will mark the cross on a half, and this is also worth 1 mark. Question 8. The diagram shows 3 motorway service stations, P, Q, and R on a map. The map has a scale of 1 centimeter is equal to 4 kilometers. Work out the real distance from P to R. So in order to do that, we first need to work out the map distance from P to R, and we can see that from P to Q, it is 8 centimeters on the map, and from Q to R, it's 16. So in order to find P all the way up to R, we would have to add the 8 centimeters and the 16 centimeters, and that would give us 24 centimeters. We can then write the ratio of the distance on the map to the real distance, and the scale that we've been given is 1 centimeter represents 4 kilometers, and what we have on the map from P to R is 24 centimeters. So in order to find what that would be as a real distance, we can see what we have done from 1 centimeter in order to get to 24, and we have multiplied that by 24. So in order to find the real distance, we will also multiply the 4 kilometers by 24. So if we work out 4 times 24 on the calculator, this gives us an answer of 96 kilometers. So this was a 3 mark question, and the first mark would have been awarded for finding the 24 centimeters, which is the map distance from P to R. The second mark would have been awarded for knowing that we would have to multiply the 4 by 24 using ratios. And the final mark would be given for getting a final correct answer of 96 kilometers. Question 7. Here's a triangle. The triangle is accurately drawn. Part A, measure the length of AC. So we can measure this length using our ruler. So if we put the 0 centimeters on A and we measure up to C, That gives us 9.3, so we can write down 9.3 as our answer. However, if you got anything in the range between 9.1 to 9.5, we would also be awarded a mark for any of those values. Part B, measure the sides of angle B. So for this, we can use our protractor, and we can put the protractor such that the 0 is on the line AB. And if we read the scale here, we can see that from 0, we are going all the way up to 106 degrees. So we can write this as 106 degrees. However, for anybody who got an answer in the range of 104 degrees to 108 degrees, they would also be awarded 1 mark for these values. The next part says, here's a different triangle. QP is equal to QR. Write down the mathematical name of this triangle. So for any triangle that has 2 lengths that are equal, we call this an isosceles triangle. So we would get 1 mark here for writing down isosceles. Question 9 says, here are the first 5 terms of a sequence, 3, 8, 13, 18, 23. Part A, write down the next term of this sequence. So if we look at this sequence, we can see that for each term we are adding on 5. 3 plus 5 is 8, and 8 plus 5 is 13. And therefore, to find the next term of the sequence, we will just do 23 plus another 5, which gives us 28. Part B says, write down the ratio of the second term to the fourth term. Give your ratio in its simplest form. So the second term of this sequence is 8. So if we write down 8, and then the fourth term, as we can see, is 18. So if we write down 18 as the fourth term, we have the ratio 8 to 18. And we can now simplify this ratio by dividing by 2 because they are both even numbers. So if we do 8 divided by 2, that gives us 4. And if we do 18 divided by 2, that gives us 9. So the ratio in the simplest form is 4 to 9. Part A was a 1-mark question which would be given for writing a correct answer of 28. Part B was a 2-mark question. So the first mark would be given for writing the correct ratio of 8 to 18, and the second mark would be given for simplifying the ratio correctly and writing 4 to 9. Question 10. This graph can be used to find the cost of parking a car in a car park for up to 12 hours. Part A, use the graph to find the cost of parking a car for 4 hours. So as we can see, the x-axis represents the number of hours and the y-axis represents the cost in pounds. So if we're looking for how much it was to park it for 4 hours, we first have to identify where the 4 hours is on the x-axis, and then we can take the ruler and draw a straight line going up from 4 until it meets the graph, and then look at the corresponding value on the cost axis, and that is £6. The next part says, Julian drives into the car park at 8 o'clock in the morning. When he drives out of the car park, he has to pay £9. Part B, at what time does Julian drive out of the car park? So if Julian is paying £9, that means we first have to find out how much time he spent in the car park. And in order to do that, we can look for 9 on the cost axis, which is the y-axis, and 9 would be there in the middle of 8 and 10. We can then draw a line going from 9 until it meets the graph, and then look at the corresponding value on the x-axis, which is 6. Therefore, we can say that for £9, he spent 6 hours. And the question is asking us what time Julian drove out of the car park. Therefore, that means if he entered at 8, we would add on 6 hours, and that would take us to 14 o'clock. Part A was a 1-mark question, and Part B was a 3-mark question, where we would get the first mark for finding that he spent 6 hours in the car park, a second mark for identifying that we would have to add the 6 hours onto 8, and a third mark for a correct final answer of 14 o'clock. Question 11. The table shows information about the weights of people in a hotel lift. Show that the total weight of the people in the lift is less than 1,200 kilograms. So in order to do that, we can first look at the table, and the table tells us one person weighed 40 kilograms. If two people weighed 50 kilograms, that means in the category of 50, we have 100 kilograms. If four people weighed 60, we can multiply 60 by 4, which gives us 240 kilograms. And in this way, we can multiply out the number of people by their weights. So we can do 70 times 5, which gives us 350 kilograms, 80 times 3, which gives us 240 kilograms, and 90 times 1 gives us 90 kilograms. To find the total weight, we can then add all of these values, and if we work that out on the calculator, this will give us a total of 1060 kilograms. The question is asking us to show that the weight is less than 1200 kilograms. We can therefore say that 1060 kilograms is less than 1200 kilograms. For this question, we would get 1 mark for multiplying all the frequencies by the weights, a second mark for adding them up correctly and getting a correct answer of 1060, and a final mark for comparing them correctly to show that the total was less than 1200. Question 12. Shape A is reflected in a mirror line to give shape B. Part A, on the grid, draw the mirror line. So what we can do is first pick a corner in shape A and look at the corresponding corner in shape B. So if we pick the two corners of the base, we can pick this as the first corner. The corner corresponding to that one is this one, so we can draw a line joining the two corners, and we can do the same for the second corner. We can then count the midpoint of these lines which are joining the corners. So if we count this one, we've got one box here and another box there, and therefore the middle is that point there. In the line below, we've got one box on either side, a second box on either side, and therefore the midpoint would be in the middle of that third box, which is there. Therefore, to draw the mirror line, we would just draw a line connecting the two midpoints, and that would be this line here. So we can see it is a diagonal mirror line. And this was worth 1 mark. Part B says, Alex is asked to reflect shape P in the x-axis. Here is the diagram Alex draws. Explain the mistake Alex has made. So if Alex needed to reflect this in the x-axis, that means the reflected shape should have been in this quadrant here. Therefore, we can say that the mistake that he has made is that Alex has reflected the shape in the y-axis instead. And this explanation was worth 1 mark. Question 13. There are 50 teachers in a school. This is 1/16 of the total number of people in the school. Work out the total number of people in the school. So this question is telling us that one part of a total of 16 parts. So if we have a total of 16, one part of this is representing the 50 teachers. And therefore, in order to find the total number of people in the school, we will just do 50 multiplied by 16. And this gives us 800. So this was a 2-mark question, and the first mark would be given for identifying the correct method of multiplying 50 by 16, and the second mark would be given for getting a correct final answer of 800. Question 14. Packets of sweets are put into boxes. Each packet is a cuboid, 80 millimeters by 60 millimeters by 20 millimeters. Each box is a cuboid, 72 centimeters by 48 centimeters by 24 centimeters. Work out the greatest number of packets that can be put into each box. So for this question, we can first see that the units given for the packet are in millimeters and the units given for the box are in centimeters. Therefore, we would first have to convert all of these units into centimeters. And in order to convert millimeters into centimeters, we need to divide by 10. So 20 divided by 10 makes this 2 centimeters. 60 divided by 10 makes this 6 centimeters. And 80 divided by 10 makes this 8 centimeters. We then know that if we are stacking all these packets into the box, we will first make a layer on the bottom of the box, which will run through the box in this manner. So in order to find how many boxes will fit in the length of the box, we will have to do 72 divided by 8, which gives us 9. So this means 9 packets will fit in the length of this box. We can then check how many will fit into the width of this box. And the width of the box is 48. So if we do 48 divided by the width of the packet, which is 6, this gives us 8, which means that 8 packets will fit into the width of this box. We then need to stack these packets on top of one another. So in order to check how many we can fit such that they fit into the height of this box, we would do 24 divided by 2, and that gives us 12. This means that we will have 9 packets in the length of the box, 8 packets in the width of the box, and 12 packets along the height. So in order to find how many boxes we can fit in total, we would do 9 times 8 times 12, and we can work that out on the calculator, and that gives us 864. This was a 4-mark question. The first mark would be awarded for correctly converting the units into centimeters so that they match the units of the box. The second mark would be given for finding out how many packets will fit into each dimension of the box. The third mark would be given for correctly multiplying the number of packets which fit into each dimension. And the fourth mark would be given for a correct final answer of 864. Question 15. Here's a fair ordinary dice and a fair 8-sided spinner. Charlie throws the dice once and spins the spinner once. Is Charlie more likely to get a number less than 3 on the dice or a number greater than 5 on the spinner? You must show all your working. So in order to check how likely Charlie is to get a number less than 3 on the dice, we can look for the probability of getting a number less than 3 on the dice. And we know that a fair ordinary dice has 6 numbers on it, and the numbers which are less than 3 are just 1 and 2, which is 2 numbers out of a total of 6, and we can simplify that probability to 1/3. In order to find how likely Charlie is to get a number greater than 5 on the spinner, we can find the probability of getting a number more than 5 on the spinner. And the numbers which are more than 5 on the spinner are 6, 7, and 8, which is 3 numbers out of a total of 8. In order to see which one he is more likely to get, we will now have to compare these probabilities of 1/3 and 3/8. So we can do this by converting them into decimals on our calculator. So if we press 1/3 on the calculator and then press the SD button, this gives us 0.33 recurring. And if we do the same thing and type in 3/8 on the calculator and press the SD button again, 3/8 as a decimal is 0.375. So if we compare these decimals, we can see that 0.375 is the greater number, and therefore we can say that Charlie is more likely to get a number greater than 5 on the spinner. This was a 3-mark question, and we would get 1 mark for correctly finding the probabilities of both the dice and the spinner. The second mark would be given for correctly comparing them by converting them either into a decimal or fractions with the same denominator or into percentages. And we would get a final mark for stating that Charlie is more likely to get a number greater than 5 on the spinner. Question 16. Paolo drives at an average speed of 56 kilometers per hour for 1 hour 45 minutes. Work out the distance Paolo drives. So we know that the formula for speed is equal to distance divided by time. And if we rearrange this formula to find the distance, we can see that distance will be equal to speed multiplied by time. The speed given to us is 56 kilometers per hour, and the time given to us is 1 hour 45 minutes. So in order to put this into the formula, we have to make the units match the speed, and the units of the speed is in hours. So in order to make 1 hour 45 minutes into hours, we would have to convert the 45 minutes into an hour. So if we do 45 divided by 60, that gives us 0.75, which means that the 45 minutes is 0.75 of an hour. So the whole 1 hour 45 minutes can be written as 1.75 hours. If we then use this value for our formula, we can write this as distance is equal to the speed, which is 56, multiplied by the time, which is 1.75. And if we work this out on the calculators, this gives us a final answer of 98 kilometers. This was a 3-mark question, so we would get the first mark for correctly working out the time in hours, the second mark for correctly substituting everything into the formula, and the final mark for a correct final answer of 98 kilometers. Question 17. There are 3 cinemas, A, B, and C. The mean number of seats per cinema is 380. There are 350 seats in cinema A. There are 250 seats in cinema B. Work out the number of seats in cinema C. So we know that in order to find the mean, we would have to first find the total and then divide by the number of cinemas that we're looking at, which is 3. So if we substitute everything into this, we know that the mean is 380. And in order to find the total number of seats, we would add 350, which is the seats in A, 250, which is the seats in B, and we don't know the number of seats in C, and that's what we're looking for, so we can just call it X. And this total needs to be divided by 3. So we can first work out the 350 plus 250, which gives us 600, which is the total number of seats in A and B, and then write this as 600 plus X over 3. This is now just an algebraic equation, so in order to find X, we would first multiply both sides by 3 in order to get rid of the 3 from the denominator. And we can see the 3's cancel out on the right-hand side. So if we work out 3 times 380, this gives us 1,140, and this is equal to 600 plus X. We can then take away 600 on both sides. So if we do 1,140 take away 600, this will give us X, which is the number of seats in cinema C. X will be equal to 540. This was a 4-mark question. So first, we would get 1 mark for knowing how to find the mean and correctly substituting all the values. The second mark would be for correctly finding out the total number of seats in cinema A and B. The third mark would be for multiplying the 380 by 3 and taking away the 600. And the final mark will be for a correct final answer of 540. Question 18. Asha buys 180 cans of cola. The cans are sold in packs. There are 12 cans in each pack. Each pack costs £3. Part A, work out the total cost of the cola Asha buys. So we know that there are 12 cans in each pack, and each pack costs £3, which means that the 12 cans in a pack is costing £3. Asha is buying 180 cans. So in order to find out what that will be, we can check what we did to the 12 to make it 180. So if we do 180 divided by 12, that gives us 15, which means 12 multiplied by 15 is giving us 180. Therefore, if we do the same to the £3, we can do 3 multiplied by 15, and that gives us £45. So Asha is spending £45 on the 180 cans of cola. Part A was worth 3 marks, so we would get a first mark for being able to identify that we need to multiply by 15, a second mark for multiplying the £3 by 15, and a third mark for a correct answer of £45. The next part of the question says, Ethan buys a box of 24 cans of lemonade for £7. There are 330 millilitres of lemonade in each can. Work out the cost of 100 millilitres of lemonade. So we know that in each can there is 330 millilitres of lemonade. So we can write that one can has 330 millilitres. Therefore, first we can see how many millilitres we will have in 24 cans. So in order to make 1 into 24, we have multiplied by 24. So we will do the same on this side. So if we do 330 multiplied by 24, That gives us 7,920 milliliters. We're then told that 24 cans of lemonade cost £7, and we know 24 cans contain 7,920 milliliters, and this is what is costing £7. The question is asking us to work out the cost of 100 milliliters of lemonade. So in order to do this, we can first work out what 1 milliliter costs. And in order to make 7,920 into 1, we have just divided it by itself. So if we do 7 divided by 7,920, we can work that out on the calculator, and that gives us a fraction of 7 over 7,920 pounds. We then need to check what we did to the 1 in order to make it 100, and we have just multiplied 1 by 100. Therefore, we would have to do the same to the answer that we got. So if we use the answer that we got and multiply it by 100, that gives us 0.088, and these values are in pounds. Because the question is asking for the answer in pence, we can then just multiply the 0.0883 pounds by 100 in order to make it into pence, and that would give us 8.8 pence, and we can round that up to 9 pence. Part B was also a 3-mark question, and we would get 1 mark for first finding out the capacity of 24 cans. The second mark would be for finding out how much we have in 100 milliliters, and the final mark would be for correctly giving an answer of how much it costs in pence. Question 19. 240 people work at a factory. Of these people, 150 have a car, 110 have a bicycle, 65 of the people who have a bicycle do not have a car. Use this information to complete the frequency tree. So out of the 240 people, we know that 150 of them have a car, so they can go in this section. Therefore, in order to find how many do not have a car, we can just do 240 take away 150, and that gives us 90. So 90 people do not have a car, and we can put it in this section. We're then told that 110 people have a bicycle, and the section that represents people who have a bicycle are these two sections. We're then told that 65 of the people who have a bicycle do not have a car. So we are looking at this section of people who do not have a car but have a bicycle, and that is 65. So in order to find the people who do not have a car nor a bicycle, we can just do 90 take away 65, and that gives us 25. We then know that 110 people should have a bicycle, and we already know out of the 110, 65 has been put for those who do not have a car. So out of those who have a car and also have a bicycle, we can do 110 take away 65, and that gives us 45. Out of the 150 people who have a car, we know that 45 have a bicycle. So to find how many do not have a bicycle, we can do 140 take away 45, and that gives us 105. So now we have completed the frequency tree. Part B says what percentage of the 150 people who have a car also have a bicycle? So we're looking at this section of people who have a car and also have a bicycle, which is 45. So we can write this as 45 out of the 150 people. And we can multiply that by 100 to make it a percentage, and that gives us 30%. So part A was a 3-mark question, and we would get the full 3 marks if we completed all the sections of this frequency tree correctly. And for part B, we would get 1 mark for correctly writing 45 as a fraction of 150, and the second mark for getting a correct final answer of 30%. Question 20. Work out the value of 25 take away root 43.87 over 6.21 squared. Write down all the figures on your calculator display. So for this, we can simply put this into our calculator. So we will put 25 minus the root of 43.87 over 6 plus 2.1 squared. And we can write down all the values on the calculator display, which is 1.765 27923. Part B says work out the value of the reciprocal of 0.625. So we can first write 0.265 as a fraction, and we can use our calculator to do that, which is 5/8. And because we're working the reciprocal, that means that the denominator becomes the numerator and the numerator becomes the denominator. So the reciprocal of this would be 8/5. So for question 20, we would get a full 2 marks if we got all the figures written correctly from the calculator, and part B was a 1 mark question. Question 21, write 60 as a product of its prime numbers. So for this, we can first break down 50 into any of its factors. We can choose 10 and 6. And because 10 and 6 are not prime numbers, we can further break them down each. So for 10, we can write the factors, which are 5 and 2. And because 5 and 2 are both prime numbers, we can put a circle around them. For 6, we can break it down into the factors of 3 and 2. And again, because 3 and 2 are both prime numbers, we can circle them. So to write 60 as a product of its prime numbers, we can write it as 2 multiplied by 2 multiplied by 3 and multiplied by 5. So first, we would get 1 mark for using the correct method to find the prime factors. And the second mark would be for getting a correct final answer for the prime products. Question 22. There are 48 counters in a bag. There are only red counters and blue counters in the bag. The number of red counters to the number of blue counters is equal to 1 to 2. Helen has to work out how many red counters are in the bag. She says there are 24 red counters in the bag because 1 is half of 2 and 24 is half of 48. Is Helen correct? You must give a reason for your answer. So for this question, we are told that there's a total of 48 counters, and the red counters and blue counters are in the ratio of 1 to 2. Therefore, if Helen is looking for the number of red counters, she would have to do the 1 part, which represents the red counters, divided by the total number of parts, which is 3, and therefore she would have to look for 1/3 of the total number of counters, which is 48, and that gives 16. Therefore, we can say that no, Helen is not correct. And here we would get 1 mark for correctly stating this and giving a valid reason which supports the answer. Question 23. -2 is less than or equal to n, which is less than 5. N is an integer. Part A, write down the greatest possible value of n. So because n is less than 5, the integer just before 5 is 4, therefore the greatest number that n could be is 4. Part B says on the number line, show the inequality -4 is less than or equal to m, which is less than 1. So for this, we would first do a closed circle on -4 because m can be equal to -4 as well. And because m is less than 1, we would draw an open circle there and then connect the 2 circles with a line. Part C says solve 2/5g - 4 is less than 6. So for this question, we would first have to add 4 onto both sides, which would make it 2/5g is less than 6 plus 4. And if we work out 6 plus 4, we can write this as 2/5g is less than 10. We can then multiply both sides by 5 so that the 5's cancel out on the left-hand side, and we will be left with 2g is less than 10 times 5, which is 50. We can then divide both the sides by 2 so that the 2's cancel out on the left-hand side, and this leaves us with g is less than 50 divided by 2, which is 25. So for part A, we would get 1 mark for writing 4. For part B, we would get 1 mark for doing a closed circle on -4 and an open circle on 1 and correctly joining them together. For part C, we would get 1 mark for adding 4 onto both sides. We would get a second mark for multiplying by 5 and then dividing by 2, and a final mark for getting a correct final answer of g is less than 25. Question 24. Here is a triangle and a rectangle. All measurements are in centimeters. The area of the triangle is 10 centimeters greater than the area of the rectangle. Work out the value of x. So first, we can start by making an expression for the triangle's area. And we know that the area of a triangle is given by a half times base times height. So we can substitute the base for 8 and we can substitute the height for 6x. If we multiply that out, that gives us 48x over 2, and we can simplify that to 24x. We can then find an expression for the area of the rectangle, and we know that the area of a rectangle is given by the length multiplied by the width, and if we substitute the length, we know the length is 5, and we can substitute the width with 4x minus 1. So to simplify this expression, we can just expand the brackets and write this as 5 times 4x, which is 20x, and 5 times minus 1, which is minus 5. We're then told that the area of the triangle is 10 centimeters greater than the area of the rectangle, which means that the area of the triangle 24x is equal to the area of the rectangle, which is 20x minus 5, plus another 10 centimeters squared. So we can now simplify the right-hand side by writing this as 24x is equal to 20x, and we can simplify the minus 5 plus 10 and write that as plus 5. We can then minus 20x on both sides, which would make it 4x is equal to 5, and therefore x would be equal to 5 over 4, which is the same as 1.25. So in this question, we would get the first mark for correctly writing an expression for the area of the triangle, a second mark for the area of the rectangle, a third mark for correctly making an equation linking the two areas, and the final mark for getting a correct final answer of 1.25. Question 25. Last year, a family recycled 800 kilograms of household waste. 57% of this waste was paper and glass. The weight of paper recycled to the weight of glass recycled is equal to 12 to 7. Calculate the weight of glass the family recycled. So first, we can find the weight of the paper and glass that the family recycled, because we know that they recycled 57% of the total waste. And that means we just need to find 57% of 800. So we can do this by putting into our calculators 57 over 100 times 800, and this will give us 456 kilograms. So out of the 456 kilograms, 12 parts of this was the paper and 7 parts of this was the glass. So if we write this as a ratio of the weight of the paper and the glass, we can see that 12 parts was paper, 7 parts was glass, which means that the total part it was divided into is 12 plus 7, which is 19. So if we divide the 456 kilograms into 19 parts, that gives us 24, which means the paper was 12 parts, so we would have to do 12 times 24. And the glass was 7 parts, so we would have to do 7 times 24. And we are interested just in the weight of the glass recycled. So if we do 7 times 24, that gives us 168 kilograms. This was a 3-mark question, and the first mark would be given for finding 57% of the 800. The second mark would be for finding that one part was worth 24 kilograms, and the final mark for multiplying the 24 by 7 and giving a correct final answer of 168 kilograms. Question 26. A number D is rounded to 1 decimal place. The result is 12.7. Complete the error interval for D. So if 12.7 was rounded to 1 decimal place, that means the decimal place before it is 12.6, and the number after it to 1 decimal place would be 12.8. So if we're looking for the error interval, we have to look at the two numbers in between 12.6 and 12.7, and 12.7 and 12.8, and that means the lower bound for this would be 12.65, and the upper bound would be 12.75. And here, 1 mark would be awarded for getting a correct upper bound and a correct lower bound each. Question 27. Tamsin buys a house with a value of 150,000. The value of Tamsin's house increases by 4% each year. Rachel buys a house with a value of £160,000. The value of Rachel's house increases by 1.5% each year. At the end of 2 years, whose house has the greater value? You must show your working. So for this question, we can first start by finding the value of Tamzin's house after 2 years. And we can see that because it's increasing by 4% each year, this means that it is increasing at a compound interest rate. So we can just do the primary value, which is 150,000, multiplied by the multiplier, which would be 1.04 to the power 2, because we are looking for the value after 2 years. And if we work this out in the calculator, this would give us £163,000 and 240. We can do the same and work out the value of Rachel's house. So if we do that, we would do 160,000 multiplied by the multiplier, which would be 100 plus the 1.5, which would be 101.5%. And if we write that as a decimal, that would be 1.015. And we would also put that to the power 2. And if we work that out in the calculators, this will give us £164,836. Therefore, we can say that Rachel's house has a greater value. And here we would be given 1 mark for finding the correct value of Tamzin's house after 2 years, the second mark for working out the correct value of Rachel's house after 2 years, and 2 marks for comparing these two values correctly and giving a final answer stating Rachel's house has a greater value and supporting it with all this working out. Question 28. Here are 5 graphs. The table shows the equations of these graphs. Match the letter of each graph with this equation. So the first equation is y is equal to x squared minus 4x, and this is a quadratic equation. And we know that the shape of a quadratic equation is always a U or an upside down U, and therefore this one is going to be graph B. The next equation is y is equal to x plus 3, and we can see that this graph has a positive gradient. The two graphs that show linear graphs are A and D, but A has a negative gradient and D has a positive gradient. Therefore, the graph matching this equation would be D. The third equation is y is equal to x cubed minus 2, and this is a cubic equation. We only have one cubic graph here, which is E, so the equation matching this one would be E. The fourth equation is y is equal to 1 over x, which is a reciprocal equation, and the reciprocal graph amongst these is only C, so for this one we would put C. The final equation is y is equal to 5 minus 2x, and the gradient is minus 2, meaning this has a negative gradient, and therefore the equation matching this graph would be A. In this question, we would get a full 3 marks if we got all the letters matching the equations correctly. Only 2 marks would be awarded if 3 or 4 of these were matched correctly, and if 2 of them are matched correctly, 1 mark would be awarded.